The Cache at Wolf's Tooth. The float plane left at 9:14 in the morning, and by 9:20 the silence was so complete that Mara Holloway could hear her own pulse in her ears. She stood on the gravel bar where the Cessna had bounced and lifted, watching the last glint of its wings dissolve into the gray Alaskan sky. The Tatlanica River slid past her boots, milky with glacial silt, moving faster than it looked. Behind her rose the dark wall of spruce, and behind that, the mountains, the Wolf's Tooth Range, named for a single fang of granite that bit upward at the clouds. Somewhere up there, 11 days' walk according to the GPS, was the reason she had spent her entire savings and quit a job she had held for 19 years. Mara was 43 years old. She was a dental hygienist from Spokane. She had never in her life done anything more dangerous than drive a snowmobile across a frozen lake, and that had been 20 years ago, and she had been terrified the whole time. She adjusted the 70-pound pack on her shoulders, felt the straps cut into the bruises they had already made on the walk down to the plane that morning, and said aloud, "To nobody. Okay, Daniel, I'm here." The wind took the words and gave nothing back. To understand why an ordinary woman would walk alone into one of the emptiest places on the continent, you have to understand Daniel Holloway, who was her brother, and who was dead. He had died 14 months earlier on a mountain in Nepal, swept off a ridge by a slab of wind-loaded snow at 19,000 feet. They had recovered his body in the spring. Mara had flown to Kathmandu to bring him home, and in the hostel where he'd kept a locker, she had found, among his climbing gear and his battered paperbacks, a waterproof journal and a single laminated topographic map. The map showed the Wolf's Tooth Range. A red X marked a spot below the saddle between two peaks, and beside it, in Daniel's small, dense handwriting, were the words, "The Cache. For M. If anything happens to me, go. Don't tell anyone. Don't trust the second set of tracks." The journal was harder. Most of it was ordinary. Weather notes, gear lists, the small complaints of a man who lived hard and loved it. But the last 20 pages were about Alaska, about a trip Daniel had made there 3 summers before, a trip Mara had known nothing about. He had gone into the Wolf's Tooth with a partner he called only G. They had found something. The journal never said precisely what, only that it was worth more than both our lives combined. That G can never know I went back for it, and that he had hidden it in a cache below the saddle. The last entry, dated 4 days before he flew to Nepal, read, "If I don't come back, it falls to Mara. She's the only person on earth I trust to do the right thing with it. God help her." Mara had read those words 300 times. She had read them until the ink seemed to detach from the page and float in front of her eyes at night. The reasonable part of her, the large, sensible, dental hygienist part of her, had told her over and over that this was madness, that she should hand the map to the authorities or to Daniel's climbing friends and let them sort it out. But Daniel had written, "Don't tell anyone." And Daniel had written, "She's the only person on earth I trust." And in 19 years of cleaning teeth and paying a mortgage, and divorcing a man who had bored her into a kind of waking sleep, no one had ever said anything like that about Mara Holloway. So she had taken a wilderness first aid course and a navigation class, and she had spent 6 months walking the foothills outside Spokane with a loaded pack until her knees screamed. And then she had come north. She turned away from the river and walked into the trees. The first 3 days were almost gentle, as if the country were testing her with kindness before it showed its real face. She followed the river valley, the GPS guiding her along game trails that wound through stands of spruce and groves of dwarf birch already turning gold at the edges. The walking was hard but rhythmic. She learned the weight of her pack, the way you learn a difficult relationship, where it would hurt you, where it would forgive you. She camped on gravel bars where the wind kept the mosquitoes down. She filtered her water and ate her freeze-dried meals, and lay in her tent, listening to the river talk to itself all night. On the second evening, she saw a grizzly across the valley, a brown shape moving along the far bank, digging at something, unconcerned with her. Her heart slammed against her ribs for a full 10 minutes after it had ambled out of sight. She slept that night with the bear spray in her hand and dreamed of Daniel, who in the dream was sitting at her kitchen table in Spokane, perfectly alive, drinking coffee. And when she asked him what was in the cache, he only smiled and said, "You'll know it when you see it," which was no help at all. It was on the morning of the fourth day that she found the tracks. She had stopped to refill her water bottles at the mouth of a side creek, and there in the wet sand of the bank were boot prints. Human boot prints, Vibram-soled, larger than hers. They came down out of the trees, paused at the water as if their owner had also stopped to drink or rest, and then continued upriver, the same direction she was going. Mara crouched over them for a long time. Her mind did a thing she would come to know well over the following days. It offered her a comforting story, first. Hunters, a guided group, another solo hiker. The country's big, but it's not empty. People come here. Then the second story arrived, the cold one. Don't trust the second set of tracks. She straightened up and looked at the trees and felt, for the first time, watched. The prints were not fresh. The edges had softened, and a beetle had walked across one of them, leaving its tiny scribble. A day old, maybe 2. Whoever it was, they were ahead of her. She told herself this was good. Better ahead than behind. She told herself a great many things, and then she shouldered her pack and went on. And she found that she was now walking more quietly, placing her feet with care, listening. She did not see the tracks again for 2 days, and she nearly convinced herself she had imagined their meaning. Then, on the 6th day, climbing out of the river valley onto the broad tundra bench that ran toward the mountains, she crested a rise and saw, perhaps a mile ahead and slightly below her, a tent. It was a small green dome tent, pitched beside a tarn, a still pond reflecting the white peaks. There was no movement around it, no smoke, no figure. Just the tent, sitting in all that emptiness, like a green seed dropped from the sky. Mara dropped to her belly behind a hummock of crowberry. Her pulse was going again, that traitor pulse. She watched the tent for 20 minutes. Nothing moved. The wind pushed ripples across the tarn. A pair of sandhill cranes flew over, their cries rolling down out of the sky like something prehistoric. She had a decision to make, and she made it the way she had made every decision since Kathmandu, by asking what Daniel would have wanted, which was a way of asking what kind of person she was now choosing to be. She could go around. The bench was wide. She could swing far to the south and skirt the tarn, and probably never be seen. That was the sensible choice, the dental hygienist choice. Or she could find out who was out here, 100 miles from any road, walking the same path she was walking. She thought about the 11 days of walking that still lay before her, The days she would spend wondering if those boot prints were behind her or ahead of her, whether the person in that tent was a fellow traveler or the G of Daniel's journal, the partner who could never know. She thought, I will not be able to do this if I am afraid of every shadow. I have to know. She left her pack behind the hummock, took the bear spray and her knife, and crawled and crouched her way down the slope toward the tent. The tent's owner was a woman, and she was sick. Mara realized this when she was still 50 feet away, and a voice called out, weak and cracked, "Hello, is someone there? Please, I can hear you. Please." Mara froze. Then she stood up, because there was no point crouching anymore, and walked the rest of the way. The tent flap was open. Inside, propped against a rolled sleeping bag, was a woman of perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled back from a face that was the wrong color, grayish, sheened with sweat despite the cold. Her right leg was stretched out in front of her, and even through the loose fabric of her pants, Mara could see the swelling, the wrongness of the shape below the knee. "Oh, thank God," the woman breathed. "Thank God. I thought I was hearing things. I've been—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm Ellen. I broke my leg 4 days ago. I fell on the scree above the pond. I have water from the tarn, but my food's almost gone and I can't. My satellite messenger broke in the fall. I've just been waiting." She laughed, a terrible sound, praying somebody would come. And somebody came. Mara knelt at the tent door. The sensible part of her was already cataloging dehydration, possibly infection, definitely shock at some point, the broken tibia obvious now that she could see the leg. The wilderness first aid course flooded back. Splint, hydrate, treat for shock, evacuate. "My name's Mara," she said. "I have a satellite messenger. I can call for help." Ellen began to cry silently, the tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. Mara went back for her pack. She made Ellen drink, slowly, with electrolyte tablets dissolved in the water. She heated a freeze-dried meal and fed it to her in small spoonfuls. She examined the leg as gently as she could and found, to her enormous relief, that the skin was unbroken. A closed fracture, not the much more dangerous open kind. She re-splinted it properly with one of her tent poles and the foam from her sleeping pad. And then she took out the satellite messenger and stared at it for a long moment. To send the SOS was to summon a helicopter. The helicopter would come from a town she had never been to, flown by people who would file a report. There would be records. There would be questions about what she, Mara Holloway, dental hygienist from Spokane, was doing alone in the Wolf's Tooth. Don't tell anyone. But Daniel was dead, and Ellen was alive, and Mara had not crawled down that slope and learned this woman's name to let her die for the sake of a secret. She pressed the SOS button. The little device beeped, searched, and finally showed. Message sent. Help is on the way. "It's done," Mara said. "They're coming." Ellen reached out and gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Bless you," she whispered. "Bless you, Mara." The helicopter could not come until morning. The weather had socked in over the mountains. The satellite messenger relayed a terse exchange with the dispatcher, and the upshot was that no pilot would fly the Wolf's Tooth in the dropping cloud and rising wind. First light, if the ceiling lifted. Maybe later. So Mara settled in to wait with Ellen, and the two women talked, the way strangers talk when the world has narrowed to a green nylon dome and the dark coming on. Ellen, it emerged, was a retired schoolteacher from Anchorage. She had been coming into the back country alone for 30 years. "My husband never understood it," she said. "He passed 6 years ago. Heart. After that, there was nothing keeping me in town." She talked about the country the way people talk about a person they love, with an easy, worn affection. She knew the names of the peaks, the habits of the cranes, the place down valley where the blueberries grew thick in August. "What about you?" Ellen asked, when the light was nearly gone and Mara had lit a small candle lantern that threw their shadows huge against the tent walls. "You don't move like someone who's been doing this all her life. No offense, you move careful, like you're checking your work." Mara almost laughed at how exactly that described her. "I'm new," she admitted. "This is my first big trip, my first solo trip. And you picked the Wolf's Tooth." Ellen's eyebrows rose. "That's a strange choice for a first. There are easier places to fall in love with." "I'm not here to fall in love with anything." The words came out harder than Mara intended. She softened them. "I'm here for my brother. He died last year, climbing in Nepal. He'd been here before, to the Wolf's Tooth, and he left me a map. He wanted me to come." Something shifted in Ellen's face. It was subtle, and the candle made everything uncertain, all those leaping shadows. But Mara, who spent her working life reading the small flinches in people's faces as they waited for the needle, saw it. A stillness, a momentary suspension of the eye's natural movement. "Your brother," Ellen said slowly. "What was his name?" "Daniel. Daniel Holloway." Ellen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "It's a small world, the back country up here. Everyone knows everyone, eventually. I think I might have heard of him." She smiled, but the smile didn't sit right on her grave face. "Big, tall fellow? Dark hair, dark beard? Always laughing?" A cold finger touched the back of Mara's neck. Daniel had been tall, dark-haired, dark-bearded. He had laughed easily. It was the thing everyone said about him at the funeral. Always laughing. But she had not described him. And Ellen had said, "I think I might have heard of him," which was not the same as "I knew him." And yet she had described him as if she'd shared a fire with him. "Yes," Mara said carefully. "That sounds like him." "A good man," Ellen said, and looked away, out the tent door at the dark. "I'm sure he was a good man." Mara did not point out that Ellen could not possibly know that. She lay down on her side, pulling her sleeping bag over her, and she did not sleep, and she felt the weight of her pack against her back, where she had positioned it so that nothing in it could be reached without moving her. And inside the pack, deep down, wrapped in a dry bag inside another dry bag, was Daniel's map. Don't trust the second set of tracks. She lay in the dark and listened to Ellen's breathing slow and deepen into the rhythm of sleep, or its imitation, and she thought, whose tracks were those on the riverbank? They came down out of the trees and went upriver, toward the mountains, toward the saddle. And Ellen had been here, by this tarn, on the route to the saddle, with a broken leg she said was 4 days old. The timing did not work. If Ellen had been lying here 4 days, she could not have made the tracks Mara found 2 days ago, a day's walk back down the valley, unless Ellen had not been here 4 days, unless the leg was not 4 days broken. Mara made herself breathe evenly. She made herself think it through the way she would think through a difficult patient. The swelling was real. The fracture is real. I felt the ends great, God help me, when I splinted it. You cannot fake that. No, the injury was genuine. Whatever else was happening, Ellen had truly fallen, truly broken her leg. But that did not mean Ellen was who she said she was. And it did not mean Ellen had not been following her. Morning came gray and grudging, the clouds still down on the peaks like a lid. The satellite messenger buzzed, "Weather marginal. Stand by for window." They waited. Mara made tea and oatmeal. Ellen seemed stronger, the gray gone from her face, replaced by a watchful brightness that Mara liked even less. Around 10, the cloud began to lift. The white peaks emerged one by one, and the wind dropped, and the satellite messenger buzzed again. "Bird inbound. ETA, 40 minuter. Mark your position." Mara went out to lay her bright orange emergency bivy on the tundra as a marker, and when she came back into the tent, Ellen was holding the map. She had gone through Mara's pack. The dry bags were open beside her, and Daniel's laminated topo map was in her hands, and she was looking at the red X below the saddle, and she was no longer pretending. "You shouldn't have left this where I could reach it," Ellen said. Her voice had changed. It was steady now and cold, and there was no Anchorage schoolteacher in it at all. "But then, you couldn't have known. Sit down, Mara. We have a few minutes, and I want to tell you a story before that helicopter gets here, because I think you've earned it. You saved my life. That wasn't part of the plan. I'd like to do you the courtesy of the truth." Mara stood in the tent door, the cold air at her back, and did not sit down. Her hand had drifted to the bear spray on her belt. She saw Ellen note this and smile. "You won't need that," Ellen said. "I have a broken leg. I'm not going to do anything. I just want to talk." She tapped the map. "Your brother and I came in here together 3 summers ago. He didn't tell you that, did he? Or maybe he did. Maybe that's the G in his little diary. Geraldine. Everyone calls me Ellen now, but I was Geraldine Voss for a long time, and your brother knew me by both." Mara's mouth was dry. "You're G." "I'm G." Geraldine settled the map on her lap. "We found something up there, your brother and I, below the saddle. Do you know what it is, Mara? Did he tell you what's in the cache?" "No. No. He wouldn't have. He didn't even tell me he'd gone back for it." A flicker of something, old anger, old hurt, crossed Geraldine's face. "We found a plane. A small plane that went down in 1971, sticking out of the toe of a glacier where the ice had finally given it up. Inside the plane were 2 dead men, mummified by the cold, and 4 canvas bags. Do you want to guess what was in the bags?" Mara said nothing. "Gold," Geraldine said. "Raw gold and minted coins. The plane was running it out of an illegal operation. It's a long story, and most of the people in it are dead now. The point is, it was a fortune. Is a fortune. Several $1,000,000 worth by my count, though we never got the chance to count it properly." She looked up at Mara. "We agreed to come back together, with help, with the right gear, and split it. And then your brother came back alone, the sneaking son of a—" She stopped herself. "He came back alone, and he moved it. He took it out of the plane, and he hid it somewhere else. And he marked the new place on this map, the one he left for you. And then he went to Nepal and got himself killed before either of us could do anything about it." The wind shifted, and far off beneath the wind, Mara heard it. The faint thrum of rotors, still miles away. "How did you find me?" Mara asked. "I've been watching you since Spokane, dear." Geraldine said it almost kindly. "I knew Daniel had a sister. I knew if he'd hidden it, he might have left her something. People always do. They always tell the sister, the wife, the one they trust. I've had a long time to learn how this works. I watched you take the courses. I watched you buy the gear. I knew you were coming up here, and I knew why. And I bought a seat on the same plane. Oh, I was 3 rows back, in a hat. You never looked at me once. People never look at an old woman. That's the great advantage of getting old, Mara. You disappear. The tracks on the riverbank. Mine. I went ahead of you. I know this country. I know the route to the saddle. I didn't need to follow you. I needed only to be ahead of you, to be waiting near the cache when you arrived, to take it from you after you'd done the hard work of finding it. Geraldine's mouth twisted. And then I fell. An old woman moving too fast over scree, hurrying to get ahead of you, and I broke my leg like a fool. And I lay here 4 days thinking I was going to die in the very place where I was going to become rich. And then you walked over that rise. The rotors were louder now. Mara could see, far down the valley, a black dot growing against the gray. You saved my life, Geraldine said again, and for the first time her voice was not steady. I want you to understand that I know that. I lay here, and I watched you splint a leg you didn't have to splint, and feed me with food you couldn't spare, and press a button that you knew. I could see it in your face. You knew. Might ruin whatever you came here to do. And you pressed it anyway. For a stranger. She shook her head slowly. Daniel was right about you. He wrote that you'd do the right thing. I read his diary too, Mara, 3 summers ago, before he hid it from me. She's the only person on earth I trust to do the right thing with it. I hated him for that line. I thought it was sentimental nonsense. She looked down at her broken leg, at the splint Mara had made from her own tent pole and her own sleeping pad. I don't think it's nonsense anymore. The helicopter landed in a roar of grass and grit 200 yards from the tent, on the flat ground beside the tarn. 2 figures in flight suits ducked out beneath the blades and came at a crouching run with a litter between them. In the few minutes before they reached the tent, Geraldine Voss did a strange thing. She held out the map. "Take it," she said. "Put it away. Don't let them see it. When they ask, you're a hiker who found an injured woman. That's all. That's the truth, anyway." Mara took the map. Her hands were shaking. "Why?" "Because I'm done," Geraldine said. "Look at me. I'm 61 years old with a broken leg in the middle of nowhere, and I came within a day of dying alone for the sake of a glacier full of gold, and the only reason I'm not dead is a dental hygienist from Spokane who owed me nothing and gave me everything." She laughed, and the laugh turned into a cough. "I've spent 30 years out here, Mara. I told you the truth about that. I love this country, and I spent the last 3 of those years thinking about nothing but that gold, and I let it eat me until I'd follow a grieving woman into the wilderness to rob her. That's not who I want to be when I die. And I'm going to die out here someday. Not today, but someday. I'd rather die the schoolteacher than the thief." The flight medics were almost at the tent. Mara shoved the map deep into her pack. "The cache is yours," Geraldine said quickly, low. "Your brother wanted you to have it. Do the right thing with it, whatever that is. Give it to a museum, give it to charity, keep it. I don't care. Just decide it yourself. Don't let it decide you, the way it decided me." And then the medics were there, and the world filled with their voices and their efficient hands, And Geraldine Voss became Ellen the injured schoolteacher again, gracious and grateful, and a little confused from the pain, and they loaded her onto the litter and asked Mara 3 or 4 quick questions. "You the one who hit the SOS? You traveling alone? You good to keep going? Or you want a ride out?" And Mara said she was fine. She'd keep going. She was just out for the season. And they nodded, because hikers were always slightly insane, and this one seemed competent enough. And then they carried Geraldine to the helicopter and lifted her in. At the last moment, with the rotors winding up to a scream, Geraldine looked back through the open door and met Mara's eyes across the wind-blown grass. She did not wave. She only nodded. Once, a slow, deliberate nod. And Mara nodded back, and then the helicopter rose and tilted and beat its way down the valley and out of sight. And Mara Holloway was alone again, with the mountains and the wind. She sat down on the tundra beside the abandoned green tent and shook for a long time. She thought about turning back. She sat there most of the afternoon and turned it over and over. A woman had stalked her across half of Alaska for the sake of what was in that cache. People had died for it in 1971. Her own brother, she now understood, had lied and schemed and hidden things even from her, had walked into this country alone to steal a fortune from his partner. The gold had a smell on it, the smell of every bad thing people do to each other, and Mara wanted no part of that smell. But she thought, too, of what Geraldine had said. Don't let it decide you. And she thought of Daniel, who had loved this country enough to come back alone, who had faced a choice between his friend and his sister, and chosen his sister, who had written, "She's the only person on earth I trust to do the right thing with it." Mara did not know what the right thing was, but she knew, sitting alone in the gathering dark, that it was not to let fear make the choice for her. It was not to run. It was to go forward and to see, and to decide when she knew the whole truth, not before. She picked herself up and repacked her tent, and she left the green dome behind as a cairn to mark the place where one woman had chosen to stop running from her own choices, and where another woman had found, after all these years, the thing she'd been looking for in every range of mountains and every empty valley. It was not gold. The next morning, clear-headed and moving carefully, Mara turned her face toward the mountains and the saddle and whatever lay beyond, and she began to walk.